Hello, my name is Anaya Vanoni, and today I'm going to be talking about religion because I think it is one of the most, well, if not the most influential thing to ever happen to our species. And I also think it's a mixed bag. There are many people who are very religious, and there are many people who are not very religious. There are many people who share different religions, and that's completely okay. But yeah, I mean, since the dawn of our species, we've pretty much always had some form of worship or religion of some kind, even throughout civilizations that were completely obscure. When we find them or discover them, we often, there hasn't been a recorded case, I think, of there not being a somewhat advanced human civilization that didn't have some form of worship or religion. And why? Well, I mean, psychologists and historians can debate that a lot, or theologians can have an opinion on that. I think it's primarily because humans like a reason and they like a story. So if you're both from a personal perspective and an overall macro perspective, giving people some sense of identity and direction and reason to keep going, it kind of makes sense to me that this happened. Because I think everyone in their own way makes their own story, makes their own sort of direction for them. And, you know, you can take from other people's and you can have these, like, large religions that people will just go to. But, yeah, I think that makes sense. And religion, overall, I don't think you can say if religion overall has been a good or a bad thing. I think there's a lot of things to discuss about it. I think on an individual level, on a community level, it's very good because, at least both in my experience and seeing it from an outsider's perspective, I'm personally not religious, but I have had a lot of experience with religious groups, and a lot of my friends are religious. A lot of the experiences that I've had have been generally very positive. Everyone is nice, everyone cares about the other. There's a real sense of community and trust. Family, very important as well. And I think what strikes me a lot is, yeah, it's like a really big family, especially when you like go to specific churches or like organized events. Everyone really seems to care about each other in a very familial way. And I think that's good for society. Um, I also think on an individual level, like having your own relationship with a divine being can be very good, and I think is very good for a lot of people because, I mean, that relationship isn't something that anyone can really infringe upon. I mean, they can, like, physically, but your personal relationship that you have with a divine entity or with whatever you choose to believe in, it helps you. It's comforting, it's reassuring, it's also a journey, and I know for a lot of people this relationship that they have, this journey, is a big part of who they are and has helped them a lot. That's not always easy, but it's seems to be positive for most people. So I think on an individual and a small community level, maybe even like large events community level, it's pretty good, at least in my experience. Now obviously you have like outlier stories, like you have specific priests, religious leaders being individually bad in terms of the actions that they take, and there are some pretty egregious culprits of that, especially in the last 50 years. And yeah, there are outliers. Would I say that's the majority? I actually have done zero research on this, but just generally from my own experience and from learning about it, yeah, I'd say those are outliers. Church has generally been, or religious gatherings, usually there are exceptions to this, especially nowadays, seem to be very wholesome and open to most people, even if they preach otherwise with their specific religious texts. But I guess that brings me on to historical analysis and macro analysis. And I think both of those, for me, tend to lean more negative. Let's talk about history first. I mean, human depravity is omnipresent, just like religion. For whatever reason, if there are enough of us, or, I mean, yeah, if there are enough of us, and even by ourselves, we commit murder, we commit crimes, and oftentimes, a fair amount of the time, that is closely linked to religion. And I think some classic examples can be Christian colonialism, or Catholic colonialism, probably Christian colonialism, because Protestants also did it as well. Colonialism, the the Crusades, Roman censoring of religious beliefs, the Athenians justifying crimes. I mean, Aztec sacrifices. There is a large pool to draw upon of violence and religion being sort of linked together. But it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing. Like, what came first? Was it people who were violent using religion to justify their violence, or was it religion itself that made people more violent? It's probably a bit of both. People, if you analyze like hundreds of thousands of people, there are going to be people who are violent or have violent tendencies, either due to genetic predisposition and genetic anomalies, or family circumstances, or cultural circumstances. You're just going to have people who commit bad things. And perhaps it's a bit of a feedback loop. You have these kinds of people, and then once they get into an environment where their behavior is not only justified but encouraged and revered, it kind of feeds itself and becomes something bigger than it ever was. So I guess you can think of religion kind of like a tool, or like what's it called? What is the a catalyst? Whatever the chemical reaction is, it makes it stronger, it speeds it up, and when it's good, it's good, and when it's bad, it's bad. So yeah, historically, I think the primary argument for it being good is general arguments such as kindness to one another, love thy neighbor, as an example in Christianity, giving to others, having compassion for your fellow man usually, because many of these religions tended to neglect the rights of women and many other marginalized groups. But is that religion, or is that belief of the times? I mean, getting into the history of sexism and homophobia is a completely different topic, but that is actually honestly a very good example of what came first. Was it religion, or was it innate human biases that were exacerbated by religion? I don't think it's possible to know the answer. It's probably a bit of both. But let's talk about a macro level. On a macro level, I think religion is quite dangerous. And I think that oftentimes the drawbacks outweigh the benefits. I think the benefits are having people on the same page. This isn't talking about like personal beliefs or what your relationship with God is, or whatever religion is correct, because that is just a moot point, since there are so many religions who have so many different beliefs that I personally am not going to criticize one or the other or say this or that is correct, because there just isn't substantial evidence to prove that one or the other is correct over the other. Maybe all of them are correct in their own way, just a little bit, but who knows. But I think it's dangerous. I think good examples of that. Oh, sorry, the benefits. Yeah. The benefits are having people on the same page. So an example of this might be like during the Industrial Revolution or during the Enlightenment, when you had arguments for like the beauty of God, the divine nature of the world around you, and that somehow leading into an understanding of the world, a desire to do greater, a desire to help others, and like getting people on the same like motivated page can be beneficial for society. I also think it was beneficial for many people in a way to keep going. This is an example I like to bring up a lot, but it's one that I think about, which is if you're living in 1200 AD and you're a peasant and you work the fields 3-4 days a week, something like that. Depends. I mean, depends what time of year it is. But let's say that you're in the middle of summer and you're working quite a lot. You haven't reaped the benefits of your harvest, and you had a bad harvest last year, so times aren't great. But you're striving, you're working, and there's a small church in your local town, and you work for 10 hours. You go back home, then you go to church, and who do you see? You see a guy who looks just like you. He's scrawny. He's kind of, I mean, I guess in 1200, they didn't really have the Protestant, like, what's it called? Because around like 1570, there was a great shift between how Jesus Christ was portrayed and also perceived. Pre that time, it was more like, wow, he's so amazing. And after that time, it was more like humble. So, anyway, my point stands. Jesus Christ in 1200, you see him and you think to yourself, wow, that guy's just like me. And he's what, the Son of God? I mean, he looks just like a guy, And can I really achieve this great height? Can I go to heaven? Can I live out the rest of my life in absolute euphoria and bliss and become a angel of God? I don't know, I'm kind of yapping, but you see the point that I mean. I think it was a very good way for people to not necessarily delude themselves, but believe in something greater than themselves and keep going even when times are tough. So I think on a macro level, that's a pretty good benefit of religion. You can also say generally instilling positive teachings, like being kind, being kind towards others, perhaps exacerbated by religion, though I'm personally not sure how much of that is just human nature, because at least from my perspective and the perspective of people I met, human beings seem to be pretty nice, regardless of what religion they are, and regardless of other factors as well. Like, most humans you meet aren't gonna punch you in the face. They're gonna, like, if you slip and fall, they're probably gonna help you up, and if you say hello, they'll probably say hello back. So yeah. And then the drawbacks, I think, are with science and technology. This is more historical, but still true nowadays. The overlap between religious fanaticism and misinformation, scientific misinformation, is quite high. Climate change denial, usually a high correlation with extreme religious beliefs. And, I mean, it's often the case that religious arguments, people who want to disagree with you will bring up religious arguments that can neither really be proved or disproved. For example, God hates abortion. Maybe there is, in fact, an extremely powerful entity out there who just hates abortion, and he will actually just smite you for eternity if you have an abortion. But realistically, we don't know that. So, arguing with someone like that is tough because there's kind of nothing you can say against it. And that kind of argument is quite prevalent nowadays. And I also think it has a negative effect on education and critical thinking, because people often can use religious reasoning as a crutch for not actually thinking about what they are saying or what they believe, because they have the caveat of, well, God said so. And yet there is no argument against that, because if your personal interpretation of a God believes something, then, what are you going to do? There's just nothing you can really say at that point. And I think that's quite damaging overall, because, like, vaccine hesitancy, for example, people are more hesitant and less trustworthy of scientific institutions when religious beliefs are pushed as the most important thing for people. We're seeing that a lot in the United States, and I think that brings me on to the next topic, which is populism. Populism is a tool. It's a thing. Can be good, can be bad. I think religious populism is a very, very slippery slope and can easily become very negative for a lot of people. Like, I think what influenced me a lot, or not influenced me a lot, but struck me, was when there were the anti-immigration, was it anti-immigration protests, or like reclaim the country, something like that, protests in London, and then they had a Christian priest come up and give a ceremony. Now, this may come as a true revelation, but Jesus Christ was in fact a Jew from the Middle East. Now, I just think it's kind of crazy that we're pushing this this anti-Middle Eastern agenda when the very object of your faith is an individual who is from that area. But, you know, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is creating a divide, creating a barrier, creating an us versus them argument. And that's very dangerous. And it's really only getting more dangerous as the years go on. But it's also just been the case of humanity for pretty much ever. Even when you're in small groups, you can see it for yourself. Like, within like a classroom of 30 people, you inevitably will like diverge into different groups, and those different groups will create like us versus them blocks, and that's fine. That's normal. That just happens. But on a macro scale, when you have us versus them, and us versus them is Richard III versus Saladin. Yeah, please tell me I got that right. Richard III versus Saladin. It becomes a completely different story. And then what do you have? Well, you can tell your loyal soldiers that if you die in combat, then you'll go to heaven. There's no evidence to suggest that. It's faith. And if people want to die for their faith, fair enough. But I think it's fairly true to say that most people, when they're thinking rationally, don't really want to die. Why do we spend most of our lives seeking out healthcare or seeking to increase the prosperity of our lives? There are very, 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 well, very, very, very few people. The majority of people want to live. And lying to people, telling them that you dying or you doing this thing that is not good for you, it will be good for you in the afterlife, and there isn't any, photographic evidence of said afterlife, is, I think, misleading at best. But it can also be faith. And, I don't mean to trample upon one's faith, but I think it's just an objective analysis that most people don't want to die. And most people, most of the time, think death, especially death by not natural causes, is something to avoid. So going against that and getting people to die for something that may or may not exist, not very good, in my opinion. So yeah, it's very powerful. And I think a big reason for that is, as I said before at the beginning of the video, people want a reason. They want direction, and not having direction can feel very isolating. It can be very uncomfortable to not know who you are or where you want to go. But I think those don't necessarily have to come from religion. I think they can, and I think it's good if you can find that in religion most of the time, unless someone tells you you should do some bad things. But I think those come from within. I think finding your place and finding where you want to go doesn't necessarily have to come from religion. And if religion, I guess, is just a different way of saying your purpose and your beliefs, I guess probably everyone has their own religion in some way. But yeah, religion. It's a good thing, it's a bad thing, It's a thing. It's important to be wary of it. It's important to know what it can do, what it should do, and yeah, on an individual level, I think a good thing. On a small community level, I think a good thing. I think on a larger macro level, more dangerous, more iffy. But people are going to believe what they want to believe, and that's okay. Anyway, those are my thoughts on religion. Have a nice day.